is Sarah Omar, and I'm an assistant professor in Arabic and Islamic Studies here at Georgetown University. I'd like to welcome you all to our series where you get to meet scholars and hear them discuss their intellectual journeys. My guest today is Dr. Travis Zadeh, associate professor at Yale University. You can find his full biography on this page. Dr. Zadeh, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Welcome, thank you. It's a real honor to join you.
So I'd like to have us start by maybe having you tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to your areas of research. This is just an opportunity for us to get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thrilled to share my own trajectory and the kind of way I made my way through this journey to Islamic studies. I came to the field in a kind of roundabout way. I started my undergraduate career focusing on literature and Spanish. I was a double major in Spanish and literature. And during that time, I had a chance to study abroad. I lived in Spain for a semester. And I then had the opportunity to come back to Spain in the summer. And I was very interested in long distance walking. I'd been a walker. I am a walker. I've been doing walking all my life, and I love to walk. And there is in Spain a very famous pilgrimage called El Camino de Santiago, the way to St. James. And I heard about it, and I was really excited and interested. And so I spent part of that summer that I had come back to Spain walking the Camino, which goes through the Pyrenees and ends up in Santiago in Galicia, the western edge of Spain. And along the path, you stay in refugios and monasteries, and there's really good cheer, and it's a beautiful experience. And you walk through the history and towns and villages, and it's just a great way to learn about Spanish history. And of course, there is an image of St. James as a pilgrim, and he is the patron saint of Spain. And there's also, and so you see this iconography of him walking along and on the pilgrim's path. And there's this other image of St. James as Al Matamoros, the Moor killer, the slayer of Muslims. And that dual image was very powerful. So you'd see these statues of St. James bearing a sword on a horse and swinging it down and decapitating Muslims. And it's brutal and horrifying and terrifying. And that image really stuck to me and was meaningful to me in profound ways that as an undergraduate, I couldn't quite fully synthesize or process. And part of it was my own background as an Iranian American. My father is from Iran. He's an immigrant to the United States. And my mother is from a family from New England that has been in New England since the 1700s. And so I grew up with this sense of East meets West in many ways, of what does it mean to be an insider and an outsider simultaneously? What does it mean to try to cast out a whole group of people, or to feel anger and resentment to entire populations? And St. James, the peaceful pilgrim, the violent Moor slayer, was a problem for me, and I wanted to learn more about it. And so I entered graduate school with the idea that I'd study Spain, actually, and I applied to graduate programs in comparative literature. I had done a little bit of Arabic here and there along the way, but I wanted to really get into the space of Spain and Al-Andalus and Arabic, Spanish, Latin literature. And that was the beginning of the journey. As I started to do more work in these primary sources and materials, I moved east, further and further east, and I realized I actually wanted to learn a lot more about Iran and about Persia, about my own background through my father, and through Islamic history more broadly. And so while Spain was like the beginning of this journey and throughout graduate school, I have moved further and further away and have gone into a variety of new arenas that I never anticipated, but the path really started in Al-Andalus and the problem of the reconquest and the issue of Islamophobia and its long shadow in the course of modern history. Yeah, so that's how the journey started.
Wow. Well, I know that your research is really vast and wide, and you cover a number of different topics. And so, given the scope of your research, what type of questions have you been asking? How have those questions developed and evolved over time, over the the course of your career, which has been really fruitful? If you can just give us a sense of that, that would be great.
Yeah. So actually, I think coming into this, the Spanish context was really interesting because of the multilingualism right off, and I was curious about the way people navigated boundaries and frontiers, and so for in many ways, Spain is interesting as this frontier zone. There's expressions that you see in European history of actually Africa starts at the Pyrenees. This is something that the French would say, which of course has a chauvinistic contour to it. And so where are boundaries, the kind of arbitrariness of boundaries and how fluid they are. I think, as an Iranian American who hasn't really had, I've been able to go back to Iran on occasion, but there's such horrible hostility between the two countries that the inability to travel to certain spaces has an incredible toll on one's own orientation and upbringing and sense of self and sense of relationality. And so thinking about the factative nature of boundaries, that boundaries are created by nation states in the modern sense and really have an effect on who we are and how we move, but also the fictive nature of boundaries, that boundaries are imaginary, at least in these geopolitical sense, and yet they can shape so much of how we conceive ourselves in the world and how we relate to others. And so Spain was interesting as that problem, as it were, Iberia, the Iberian problem. And that problem, of course, extends itself broadly and can be applied to so many different contexts. The issue of frontiers, the issue of linguistic boundaries, epistemic boundaries, how it is we know what we know, and why we think we do. So those kinds of questions certainly shaped my first book, which was on frontiers in early Arabic geography, and the kind of fluidity that boundaries played in the conception of space and one's sense of a center and a margin, and how much those terms and concepts could move and be pushed around in different contexts. And in my first project, I thought that language was really integral to that the way that we navigate spaces not only in bodies but also linguistically. So that also has important implications for how we think of fields as a discipline. Do we organize them around languages? Do we organize them around religion? Do we organize them by literature or by context zones? And how these are in a very fundamental sense kind of mercurial and are constantly shifting. So that also extended into my second book project in really meaningful ways, which so while my first was looking at the problem of translation in a geographical sense, how geography was wrapped up in translators and interpreters and the movement of people and bodies, and in that sense of nakala in Arabic, to move across, but also translatio, to move over in Latin, and how that metaphor of movement in space could be applied to movement in language. And in my second book, I was looking, and this is really moving as I've done in the course of my writing eastwardly, into the field of vernacularization, in the way that languages play an important role in Islamic history, and there's been a kind of underappreciation of that. There's of course the impulse to see everything through the prism of Arabic, and that has obvious historical reasons and cultural importance for the primacy of Arabic, the hegemony, you could even say, of Arabic as a kind of discursive, ethical, moral, juridical set of practices. But then certainly vernacular languages, vernacular cultures, vernacular practices have played an indelible role in shaping the course and arc of Islamic history. And so one of the things that got my interest was this idea that Muslims don't translate the Quran. It has a polemical kind of undertone to it in the context of Western Europe and Orientalism, and then it certainly has an important role in modern reform movements as well. We think of Turkey, we think about debates in Egypt about translating the Quran. And it turns out that these were questions that were raised very early on in the juridical sources and in the historical sources. And I felt it hadn't really been adequately addressed. So my second project turned to the ways in which Muslims developed, creative means for engaging with the Quran in Persian and the rise of Persian as a language of learning and authority in the Arabic script. So that's how I kind of developed in the course of my first two book projects. Along the way, I've been asking questions about how we know what we know, as I mentioned earlier, and how the categories of analysis that we've inherited kind of occlude and make difficult our understanding of the past. And indeed, you could argue, I think very compellingly, that the demands of modern liberal secular society make the understanding and our comprehension of the past almost impossible. And I mean that at a metaphysical kind of ontological sense of what it is to be in the world. And so as I was doing my work on both the Quran and on geography, I encountered along the way all forms of marvels, all forms of strange stories and things that just defy our modern sensibilities. And so that has also been an interest of mine as well, how it is that we come to understand a world that is so foreign, both spatially and metaphysically. What does it mean to believe in jinn? What does it mean to have miracles that can rupture the ordinary courses of events? How does our modern understanding of superstition, of magic, of religion occlude a cult, an appreciation of the long and wide circulation of ideas that didn't conform to a modern sensibility? So these are the kind of range of questions that I've been encountering along the way, and doing it with a sense of humility, because it's vast, the kinds of materials that we have before us, and the kinds of ethical implications that we face with our scholarship.
Well, thank you so much for contextualizing your work and actually bringing it all together, right? Because sometimes it's hard to when you look at someone's writing to think of how are they bringing this and connecting this together. So thank you so much for contextualizing it for us. My last question has to do with your approach or methods, or even the theories that you've relied on while addressing some of these questions. And I know that your fields and as many fields are shifting and changing and evolving over time. So how have you sort of changed maybe or have rethought your approaches or the types of theories you're using in addressing these questions over time?
Yeah, it's a great question. It does kind of speak to the matter of the kind of ethical implications of our collective labor, of what does it mean to do scholarship and to be a scholar, and how it is that we convey our ideas, and the kind of responsibilities that we have to as a historian, and as a thinker, to the world and to our teaching and to our audiences and to those who read and consume the kinds of intellectual capital that we produce. I have found that writing is a very, very important to this process. Certainly speaking, certainly in the classroom, but in terms of public facing scholarship, the way that writing can convey and transform, in the transformative capacity of the written word. And so one element that I have found in the course of my own work is just a greater attention to what my writing is doing, and how to, at the level of the sentence, but also at the larger structural level of an article or a chapter or even a monograph. And so the importance of clarity in writing, but also sympathy to the subjects and objects that are at the heart of our work. And so that balance of thinking with clarity, but also doing so with a measure of sympathy. And what I mean by that is that, as I mentioned, so much of our conceptual vocabulary, our terms of art, the ways we go about analyzing the world of Islam, of Islamic history, have been shaped by the legacy of colonialism and of Orientalism. And that legacy makes it very hard to understand the past in which historians, intellectual, cultural historians like myself, navigate and operate. And so sympathy is a form of developing a kind of not detachment, to the worlds that we inhabit. I think that's almost impossible, that we can't be detached from those kind of dominant frames of secular liberalism in which the academy is staged, but imagining and trying to think in other terms and to think in ways that are different and other to the kind of epistemic frameworks that we inherit in which we operate. And so clarity and sympathy are, I would say, very much methods to my own work. I also enjoy play, and I think being playful is a way to solve some of the difficulties in our in the sources that we have, and also the kind of problems that intellectual history poses, and the kind of radical unintelligibility of the past to us in the present. So I think play and delight and appreciation in the endeavor of writing can have real ethical, important, real consequences in the world around us. And what I mean by that is the ability to think otherwise, the ability to think with sympathy, and the ability to kind of navigate a complex arena with kind of sensitivity. And so that those kind of ethics or modes have really shaped my own thinking. And lastly, as an intellectual and cultural historian, I find it so important to draw on the full array of materials and sources available to us. And so to tell a good story, to really think about a world in other terms, also it necessitates a kind of, I wouldn't say encyclopedic, but a willingness to engage in sources, materials, problems that are not just merely the canonical sources that we've inherited. Because I think part of the problem that we face in Islamic history is that the canonical sources are so much shaped by modernity and by the interests of modernity. So to try to understand things in their own terms, in their own context, historical and geographical, demands that we think beyond just what we imagine in the present to be meaningful, important, or authoritative.
Wow, beautiful. Thank you for that. And thank you so much for being with us and for taking us through your intellectual journey. It's really been such a pleasure and delight. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a real honor. Thank you so much.
Take care.